think we can go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone that is viewing and tuning in. Just a quick intro. My name is Amber Jackson. I'm the owner and culture curator of the Black Leaf Tea and Culture Shop. Um, uh-oh. Oh, that's fine. I'm sorry, trying to like do a couple things at one time. At one time. All right. If you are new to it, the Black Leaf Tea and Culture Shop is a loose leaf tea company. So I have a whole line of delicious and unique loose leaf tea blends, but I also use my platform to engage the community and celebrate Black culture. So if you were listening before, um, I also host a series of young Black professionals mixers that we're doing before COVID-19. However, I know a lot of people are just starting to do more things in person now. I'm not at that level yet of comfortability to have them just yet. So I might try some like virtual mixers again at some point with the fall coming around now. But the Tea Talks are also a platform that I created initially to provide a space for young Black professionals to share their thoughts and opinions and have a space where we can commune together and also challenge each other's opinions. So this is not meant to be a kumbaya circle at all whatsoever, because understanding that growth comes from uncomfortability, progression comes from multiple mindsets and being open to those as well. So uh, it's also a space to respectfully challenge ideas. With COVID, though, I've had to kind of convert this, of course, to a virtual setting, and now it's open to everyone. And so been doing these for this. I think it's the fourth one. This is the fourth one I've done since COVID, and I actually love doing it this way because I get to pick my panel or the guests I want to have and very specific topics, and the audience gets to engage at the end. So just like I mentioned before, so the conversation will be basically between Dawn and I, and then at the end, the viewing audience, you guys will have a chance to ask your questions at the end. Um, so let's get into it. I'd like to introduce my guest, Ms. Dawn Adeyemi. She is an licensed independent clinical social worker. She focuses on supporting people of color, college students, and young professionals in maintaining their emotional wellness by changing faulty thinking patterns, clinical education, and to use of prosper coping tools. She has also been a pillar of change in my life. She's also my therapist. So thank you for being here and sharing your time as well. I know you are, I'm sure, booked and busy these days with COVID and all the other stresses that are going on. Um, so I definitely want to have this conversation pre the official election time because I know it's so much going on right now with COVID, and even with COVID, that abrupt change of our lives was very challenging for some, even for me at first. Even now, people trying to get more testing going outside and trying to get back to their normal lives. But now with the election coming, things are kind of heated up again. And so this conversation about mental health and trauma is one I want to have definitely before the election. Um, just to give people some space to understanding about what therapy is, professional therapy is, and what is trauma and what the importance of identifying and breaking those things down. So I did want to start by asking you, Don, why you became a therapist and why you chose the areas of specialty that you did.
Sure. First, Amber, thank you for inviting me. I love this platform. It's my pleasure to sit and have this conversation with you, and I'm honored to be here. And hello to everyone. So why I chose therapy? Actually, when I was younger, a teenager, I used to talk to my friends all the time. And my mom, of course, like all teenagers, and my mom overheard me and she was like, "You give pretty good advice. Have you thought about psychology?" And I was like, "Oh, psychology." So fast forward to college years, I majored in psychology, loved it, felt like it was what I was supposed to do. And then another thing I often heard people say, "Oh my gosh, Sean, you're a great listener. You're such a good listener." And to me, that was, interesting because I'm like, well, when you're speaking, you're supposed to listen until I learned that that is actually a skill.
We tend to listen to respond and not to comprehend and actually listen.
For real, I did not know at that time. So needless to say, it was something that I've always been passionate in. I love helping people. And I actually just started off just doing kind of the basic anxiety, depression, and trauma is really popular. When I was in school, people didn't talk about trauma so much, but now that time has passed, people are seeing that there are a lot of trauma related issues that were overlooked before. So I've done some training in trauma, and I definitely try to incorporate it in my practice. Um, but I find myself working with a lot of achievement driven people, which Amber, would you like to speak on that?
Achievement driven.
Yeah. So, as a child, another thing I always wanted to, and I actually prayed about this, I wanted to work with people who had influence over people. Because my rationale was like, if I can help them be okay, then they can influence people and we'll all be okay.
Mm.
So yeah, and I just kind of fell into it
Nice. And I
in
think
that
that's very
sense.
interesting that you said trauma wasn't taught because I think, especially now, that's one thing I kind of appreciate about the millennial generation is we speak openly about mental health and self-care, whereas like our parents' generation is like, you pray, you go and sit and you pray. I
Mhm.
think, especially in the Black community, you either pray or you hide it. And you hide it, it just didn't happen, and that's it. But I think it's very interesting that trauma wasn't taught because I feel like a lot of things as far as depression, anxiety, it may have been stemmed from some type of trauma that may have happened. Um, so I think that's the kind of leads into my next question as to what do you see as some of the more common reasons people reach out to a licensed professional therapist?
Mhm. So, most of the time, people reach out for professional therapy when they feel hopeless or completely helpless. And they're usually at their wit ends. Church isn't as effective as it used to be to help boost their mood. Their conversations with their friends aren't doing it. The glass of wine ain't cutting it. The boyfriend is just not doing their job, or girlfriend not doing their job. And they just really don't know how to feel better. And it becomes chronic. And so then that's usually when I hear from them.
I think that was me, and I think when I reached out to you, it's been almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be I think 2 years in like January and February, something like that. But when I reached out to you, I remember it's because I had just moved to Providence. I started my job that I'm still at now, but it was just so overwhelming.
Mhm.
And it was some stress that even before I got the job, I remember I was in Chicago. I moved home to Chicago after grad school to help take care of my mom because she had some things going on and she had a habit of not telling me things. And so to be there just in case something happens and no one was there for her. So I moved home after grad school and I remember she was fine. I was ready to go back out to the world and get back to my own life. And I remember applying for jobs and nothing,
Mhm.
nothing. I remember she would complain about when I was applying for jobs. I had to show her my Indeed page where I'm like, I applied to 50 jobs this a week and I got nothing. And so it's just the stress from family, the stress of feeling like I should be so much further in life than I am, and then getting this job. And now I have to manage 38 teams by myself. And then for some insane reason, I just started business on top of all. And so for me, I don't believe I was at my wit's end just yet, but I could feel myself getting pretty close. And I remember I reached out to you because I had gotten to a point where it was just one day at work, I could not stop crying. I
Mhm.
don't know, I could not think of what it was, but I would be at my desk and my eyes would just start welling up and I would run down to the bathroom. I would just be in there for like 10 minutes, just bawling, crying. I don't know what is wrong with me. In my mind, I'm fine, but I can't stop crying. And so I'm like, you know what? I felt little bits of depression before, but it just got to a point where I can't even control my own emotions at work. I had work. And so I'm just like, and that's another thing too. In my mind, I was like, you better not be crying in front of these white people. You do not do this. And so this inkling, I felt my eyes get wet. I would bolt down the hall to the bathroom because I could not let anybody, especially I work in athletics, it's a male dominated white profession. I'd be damned. if you all see me emotional, crying, whatever, it's not happening. And so when I reached out to you, it's just like, okay, I went on Google Black therapists in Rhode Island, and then boom, there was you.
Here I am.
And it was like, okay, cool. And not just looking at that, but I did look at what you specialized in, because that's very important, because you don't want to go to someone for one thing, but they specialize at the whole other end of the spectrum. And that relationship just isn't going to work. And that's the thing people have to understand. It's a relationship.
Yes.
You have to be willing to open to have that kind of converse of that space, create that kind of space. And so I remember the first one I reached out, and, and it went to your voicemail. And it's just like, she's not currently accepting any clients. Please call back in the next few months. I'm like, few months? I need you now. Like, I need you now. I need few months. but I called back in a few months. And it's funny you said it, because of bottles of wine. They held me through those couple of months. And you were available, and we had our first meeting. Yeah. And that we just got started then. And actually, I think I had a rare occasion where I even listened to a lot of podcasts, and a lot of the podcasts you listen to, they have therapists and talk about how they kind of have to go through 2 or 3 therapists to find the right relationship. Where me, I got lucky and you just fell on my lap at the right time. Boom, perfect. But that's one thing I actually want to touch on. That it's like there's so much stigma around therapy. Especially in the Black community, where we said before, you pray about it, or you don't talk about it, or you find your own ways to cope about it. But actually going to a therapist, it seems to a lot of people in their mind, is a very extreme action. And so I want to talk about what some of the stigmas around therapy are, just in general, but also especially in the Black community, just because we know, like, I know in my house, so I grew up in Southside Chicago. We were the church family. My grandmother was a church secretary. My mama was a lead soloist. I was pretty girl's daughter. I don't get anybody. I was Marcella's daughter, and I was Miss Dockery's granddaughter. I'm the only girl, so I was very close knit. Like, the church was, we knew each other, and so it's just like that's we relied on in our household, and that's just how things were. And even in media and TV, like, therapy was like the most extreme. And I remember an episode of Living Single where Khadijah's mother suggested she go to therapy, and this woman put on a wig and sunglasses
I remember that.
Around the corner is to go see her therapist, and her therapist was like, "Girls, wrong with you?" Like, it's not that deep. And so I really think a lot of people in their mind, they have the stigma that therapy is just this extreme thing where you have to lose your mind and you're in the straitjacket going to therapy. So if you could speak on what are some of the stigmas centered around seeking professional therapy?
I think you pretty much said it. People don't want to be seen as crazy. That's really a big one. Most times when I'll even suggest, hey, why don't you talk that out with someone? I'm not crazy. There's nothing wrong with my mind. And I'm like, I know. Let's just, so yeah, people think of the extreme, because therapy historically, or mental health work historically, has been matched with, like, really, I can't control myself, over the top behaviors. And nobody wants to say out loud, I can't control me. And then the other thing is, sometimes people feel weak, and they feel like, okay, well, if I go to a therapist, it means I can't control me. That means I'm a weak person. And that's, I don't want that to be my truth. None of that is true. Most of us do therapy. We just don't do it in professional settings.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead. We're gonna. Yeah, we don't do it in professional settings. It's our parent, it's our best friend, it's our mentor. In the same way that you connect with someone and you just kind of hash out and get some objective feedback, that's what we do. And we come with some extra tools because we've studied it for a little bit. So it does not mean anyone is crazy, but yeah, many people think it's because there's something really wrong with me and I can't handle it on my own.
Yeah, so I think we talked about it in my last session where I told you, like, my oldest brother, I'm convinced in his mind, when I first told him I'm going to therapy, his mind went straight to straitjacket. Like, Amber is losing her shit. Like, oh my God, are you okay? Like I am more than because he just became so timid around me. Like I'm not suicidal. I'm not hurting myself or even thinking about hurting anyone else.
Mhm.
I felt me starting to slip away a little bit from what I know myself to be. And beyond that, I know that I can be better than this. I wanted to really dive into who in my how can I be better at this. And also I know me. I know that no one bullshits myself more than myself. I it's about me. I know that if I lie to myself long enough about something, if I said it didn't happen, it did not happen. That is me. But I think that's something that and I think a lot of people are kind of afraid of the work and they don't identify therapy. And they think it's just like you take some pills and you're fine. Like therapy is a lot of work. And also understanding that, therapy and psychiatry are different things. It's like that's where you are. It's more clinical with psychiatry. That's what more of a, you can get prescriptions and they do different type of things with that. But sitting and talking to someone, you make it now you I will say, I think you give me homework a few times because it's actual work and understanding that self-reflection is never easy to look at yourself and be like, oh girl, that was you. That
Mhm.
is not easy because in our mind it is so much easier to say you did this to me. But when it comes to a point where you could look at yourself and say, well, what part did you have in this? I don't like that. Be real, I don't like it. But I think that's really important, and I think, like I said, a lot of these things that we talk about when it comes to therapy and self care in general, when it comes to depression, anxiety, I feel like a lot of those things stem from some type of trauma, whether it be extreme or I don't think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but are all traumas extreme?
No.
And so from there, I do want to ask, like, what are the different types of traumas?
Yep, sure. So, generally speaking, we categorize it as big T trauma and little t trauma. So, big T trauma are those really extreme, disastrous events that take place, natural disasters, terrorism attacks, some sort of direct threat of harm or danger on your life, or threat of serious injury. Shootings, stabbings, things of that sort are considered big T trauma, sexual abuse, rape, all that stuff, big T trauma. Um, Little t trauma is something that has a significant effect on our emotional health and how we feel, but may not be as disastrous, objectively speaking. So, a breakup can be a little t trauma. Getting fired from a job can be a little t trauma. The loss of a pet can be a little t trauma.
Mhm.
So that's the major categories, and then they have acute trauma, which is like big T trauma. They have the chronic trauma, which is like a person in an abusive relationship or a child who's in an abusive situation where it's just ongoing. And then there's complex trauma, where a person is exposed to trauma, not necessarily at home, but just exposed to it multiple times throughout their lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are there any that you are not just you, but maybe in a general space when it comes to professional therapy or licensed therapy? Do, where do you guys see there are some that are more common in the Black community?
When I was thinking about it, and honestly, I think we're exposed to everything. I
Mhm.
think all of it, unfortunately, is common because it's generational.
Mhm.
Our introduction to the States was traumatic,
Mhm.
and then there are, so when a person experiences trauma and they don't like process it or resolve it, what happens is they unfortunately can create trauma for other people.
Hurt people, hurt people.
Right. Yes, that's
Uh,
a real thing.
I think that's really important. I don't think people really connect the dots on that all the time about generational trauma and how we continue to pass that down. And I think that's another point of why it's so important. I say it all the time. I don't care how old you are, how young you are. Every Black person needs therapy. Period. I don't care if you're from the hood. I don't care if you suburban. I don't care if you come from a a continental Black family, African or the Caribbean family. I don't care if you look like me or something like me. Every single person needs therapy. Now, me personally, I believe that this country should pay for it, but they don't want that conversation.
That's actually a really great idea.
Look, we ain't written, look, but that's another conversation. But I think that's another notion when it comes to the stigma of therapy is that it's so expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But in some cases, it can be.
Mm-hmm.
But as I was like, even with me telling people that I kind of got out of the habit of telling people you should go to therapy because some people think they genuinely cannot afford it. It's not my place to pocket watch you. But I always tell people you should probably, if you have insurance, call them and ask about your benefits because I'm able to see you because I have it included in my health insurance,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's covered for me. And so a lot of people don't know that your sometimes your health insurance it actually does cover mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always tell people to check that first. If not, there are other resources and things like that for you. That's one thing I had to kind of get out of the habit of doing. Like I was so excited about going to therapy when I first got. It's like, girl, go to therapy. I'm like, that's very much a place of privilege to. I'm going to therapy. Like if you're talking about paying out of pocket, that you better run up and the dust of your pocket will be floating around. Like that. There's some, and so I have to get out of the habit of telling people just go to therapy. I think that was definitely one to kind of back that down because that can be hurtful to some because you don't think about their own lifestyles. But back to trauma, and I think we touched on it kind of before that I know, at least for me, I did not have to come to a breaking point or a rock bottom to seek therapy. But when it comes to trauma, do you have to see what point do you see more people commonly seeking therapy, or do they really have to hit, in a case of trauma, hit rock bottom to seek therapy sometimes?
That's a good question. The general answer is no, you do not have to hit rock bottom to seek therapy for trauma. You can do it whenever you're ready.
Mhm.
Um, so, one thing I will say is that with the health insurance, everything is according to medical necessity. So, we just need to say that whatever it is you're experiencing is disrupting your functioning, your day to day functioning, or causing you significant distress.
I didn't know that. I was just coming. I was just coming. Came on copay and go by my way. I did not know that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, we got you covered. Don't worry. Yeah. So yes, if you are feeling that because of your past trauma or because of a person's past trauma, it's actually getting in the way of their growth, their thinking, their relationships, their isolating, all that stuff is helpful. But if you're just like, you know what, I went through some things, I don't know how this is going to affect me, I'm concerned about it affecting me, there is room for preventative work. The insurance may or may not cover it. But definitely there's room for it.
See, learn something every day. Cause I would for real just come in and be like, hey, hey girl, I'm back. All right, I really wanted to really just dive into the part of breaking down trauma. So, what are the steps to breaking down trauma? Are they different per person, or there's a standard like we start here and work our way down?
Um, they're different just because people are so different.
Mhm.
And so um, the basic name of the game is to desensitize you to whatever those triggers are from your trauma and to reprocess the information so that you're not viewing the traumatic event um, as if you're still living in it.
Mm.
So there are approach that I use is cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's, changing your thinking, changing your behaviors, looking at what you believe as a result of your experiences and seeing if it was, if it's reality based or if it's just feeling based, and challenging it if it is just feeling based until we get the reality of it all.
And see that right there was the part I hated. I didn't I didn't like. I said this happened. I'm like, what do you mean if it's reality? I said it happened. It's reality. That was the one part I hated. It's like, but it's what you really need to hear. Like, this how you perceived it, or was this the reality of what it was? And of course, all I know is my little feelings hurt. I don't care because I'm hurt. So that's that's how I felt. So that's what happened. But no, a lot of times, like I said, that kind of self reflection, it's a lot of work and it's ugly,
Yeah.
it's gritty, and it takes time. And I think with you, we really didn't get like diving into my trauma to maybe a year,
Year in.
almost a year in,
Hmm.
and because it wasn't what I came to you for.
Yeah, I know.
We started with depression and anxiety and worked our way on down to top notch tea.
Yeah.
But what it was. But I think that's another part of it. You have to, once again, that relationship, having to feeling to be comfortable and feel like I'm ready
Yes.
to touch on that trauma, because I know with me, with mine, well, my larger one, talking to you about it was, you were the first person I ever talked to about that, and that was 7 years after it happened.
Mm.
And I'm comfortable talking about those things now. So I told my mom about it, and it was a whole thing. She it took her a minute. She was okay. Um, but you really have to be in a space where you're ready.
Yeah.
And so if you're not ready, that's something I appreciated working with you, not even about trauma, but even with like depression, anxiety. That's one thing I like about trauma, about not trauma, excuse me, about therapy in general. Everything was my choice.
Yes.
Do you want to do this? When do you want to do this? How do you want to do this? I'm just like, we talk about it next week. It's fine. We don't do this
Yeah.
right now. Like, well, you like, I think we should talk about this, but when you're ready, we
Yeah.
can do this, because it's just some things you're not ready for.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, going back to the steps. So getting them to a point, we say it's cognitive first.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah. So I use cognitive behavioral therapy. There is this other one called EMDR, which is I move it desensitization something something. But basically, basically the way they do it is they I think move your fingers or something, move your eyes to kind of get you into almost like a trance like state, and they start to bring back these memories and these traumas, and they have you sit with it for a second so that you can really desensitize yourself
wow, okay.
from it, and reprocess the information. So
Sorry, my little
yes.
died. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good, you're good. I understand, trust me.
Like, oh, my little ring light went out, but I can hear you. It's fine.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Um, yeah, so it's, yeah, start with your thinking, start with what you're believing, identify what it is that's going on, and how you're perceiving things, and then start to really um, peel it back. And then once you're able to identify, okay, this is the issue, this is how I'm seeing the world, this is my perceived threat that's causing me to overreact in different scenarios. Now you can replace that information with what the reality is.
Mhm,
Okay, so perhaps even though I got bit by a dog when I was 7 years old,
mhm,
doesn't mean that every dog that I encounter or every dog that exists is going to try to attack me. And once you're able to get that into your system, then you test it out by saying, okay, there's a possibility that this dog is not trying to attack me. And then you see that that's the case, it helps desensitize you to that initial belief from that trauma, right? And once you're desensitized, you're desensitized. It's
mhm.
no longer an issue.
Is it the same for big T traumas as it is for little T traumas?
It is, because it's all perception. Everything's perception. One thing I will say is that even though people experience traumatic events, not everyone's traumatized by it.
Mm.
And so it really is how you're perceiving the information, how you're interpreting the information that is causing you to feel the intense emotional response at times. So, yeah, it all works the same way.
Okay. I think one thing with me when we started really diving into my biggest T, uh, I remember the first time we talked about it, and I was sitting in the chair, and took the whole session. You didn't say a word. I was going, going, I'm like ugly crying, not running. And I finally got done, and you just looked at me and you're just like, wow, that sounds like a lot of pain. And I was just stuck because it's one, it happened 7 years ago. And
Mm,
for me, I had never identified it as pain. It was just something that happened to me. And I feel like we have a lot we have a habit of just saying, this happened, you move on. I know, like, especially for Black women, we're kind of trained to just, you stay strong, you soldier on, you move on, because we don't have time to sit and dwell on things. You have to be strong. And so for me, I know, once again, I'm a very achievement driven person. And so my coping mechanism is I stay busy.
mhm,
If I have 15 things on my plate that should only be holding two, I don't have the space, the time, or the mental capacity to deal with things because I'm busy.
mhm,
Especially when this happened, it was a summer going into my senior year in college, and I was busy.
mhm,
I was an athlete, so I had training. I was recovering from a hip surgery, so I had rehab. I was in the training room in the morning before practice. After practice, I had study hall. I was a STEM major, so I had class and labs. I charted the American Cancer Society's Relay for Life on my campus. I was busy.
mm. Yes.
Where's Amber? In a meeting somewhere. She's not answering her phone. She's busy. Leave her alone. Like I did not have time or space to deal with anything and anyone, and I didn't.
Mhm,
Even beyond that, like I started, I, I really committed to this busy life. I was committed to it. I started at grad school before I finished undergrad. Like I was doing both. I was exhausted. And it wasn't intentional in my mind. It was not intentionally to not deal with things. It's just I took it as that's who I am. I am
mhm,
a hard worker. I get things done. I do them right. I'm busy. This is who I am. But to finally just sit, I think that was another thing too. My very first session with you, you asked me, what is it that you're looking for? And I think I said, I was looking for peace. I'm like, okay, what does that look like? I'm like, to be happy, I guess. She's like, what does that look like? I'm like, shit. I think that's nothing. A lot of us, we've never asked ourselves, what does peace and happiness look like for you? And I had to learn, for me, it's sitting still. For me to be still is hard. Even now, 2 years later, at 29 years old, I cannot sit my ass still. Can't. And it's something I've gotten much better at. I've worked hard at, but my mind rambles so much. So if I'm not sitting, I'm writing, I'm reading, I'm listening to I'm doing something. Even if I'm sitting, I'm not just sitting. And so I think asking that question from the jump with our very first session was extremely significant in me really being invested in figuring this out, because I truly insist for that week until our next session, I was seriously just like, I don't know, trying to
mhm.
figure it out for a week, and then coming back to you and just being like, so I thought about it. I don't know. But we worked on that, and I appreciate that because you were very patient with me, and it felt like a professional friendship, I would say. Because even if I was to see you in the street somewhere, I'm not stopping and talking to you. I'm not. It's weird. Because even as a business owner, when I have customers that see me outside of like a pop up or an event, and they're like, "Oh my gosh," I'm like, "Oh, hey, girl."
Yeah.
'Cause, like, for me, even as a business, as an entrepreneur, it's important for me to have that professional separation,
Sure.
and I'm not doing that. And so, but I think, um, but yes, for me, it was like and when we first started, we were going
Yeah.
every single week, and I got to a point like, I think I'm okay. We started going every other week,
Yeah.
but we would get to that one point, and we would start talking about something like, "I see you next week."
Yeah.
But I think that's the way therapy goes, especially when you start talking about trauma, because you get to a point where you think, okay, I'm okay. I
Yeah.
can deal with these things. I have the tools. I can work on this, but you come back. And that's the way the way you start opening up more, you feel comfortable to open up, you start talking about things, and things start to slowly resurface that you did not know was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell my friends, especially now with the way the world is now with COVID and the world full of jackasses and the election, but especially over the summer with all the racial and social injustices, it feels, especially in the Black community, we are in a constant state of grief. It
Mm-hmm.
just feels like we are never, like, will we ever know peace? It is, it just feels like a constant cycle of grieving. And
Mm-hmm.
that kind of brought me back to therapy. Not a constant cycle of grieving, but it's a constant cycle of reckoning.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Because I did not come to you for these things, but I keep talking to you. And they slowly come out. But by the time we got to those things, I was ready.
Yeah.
And for some of those things, I needed an extra couple of weeks, but I got there. But I think that's really important when it comes to dealing with certain traumas. Once again, every single action, every single conversation was my choice.
Yes.
So when I was ready to talk about those things, I can do that. And that's why I think, even when it, for me, when it comes to how I approach other people, when it comes to their lives or their trauma, therapy's even taught me to be more like, I watch myself about how I talk to other people, because I remember how I felt with one of my traumas. I think we talked about it, where I was in grad school and I had a man put his hands on me for the first time, first and last, actually. And I told one of my friends, and I told her, she's like, "Did you hit him back?" I was like, "No, I was just shocked. I froze." And she's like, "We would just been fighting." I'm like, "What does that do for me?" Like,
Right.
in my mind, I read it as, you called me weak because I didn't fight this 6'3", 320 pound grown ass man. That's what how, but I had to take myself away. Like, that's not how she meant it.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't think of these things because you don't recognize your own trauma when you speak to someone else when they speak about their traumas.
Yes.
I can't come at you and be like, "Girl, you better than me." What does
Mm-hmm.
that do for that person? And it's
Right.
not a compliment at all whatsoever, because it may not have been what you intended, but that's how I received it. And so I think when it comes to breaking down your traumas, it's so much that you learn about yourself. It makes you more conscious about how you treat other people, how you
Mm-hmm.
respond to other people as well. I know one thing we worked on is my empathy. Because I don't got it for you. A lot, but most things, like big things, I like, yes, I can empathize. I will be the crying
Yes.
shoulder. A lot of things will be like, "Look, you did this to yourself. I don't know. I told you to get yourself together." I would like, that's me. I'm a very blunt, I'm a very forward person. I will tell you what I feel you need to hear in the manner that I feel you need to hear it, because I know your other friends are not going to do it. But I love you. I will always start by telling you that I love you. But what is wrong
Boom.
with you? But I think, I think that's a really big thing. I think for me, I feel like I've had my traumas are kind of across the board. I've had my big T's where it was domestic violence and sexual abuse. I've had my little T's where it's been from parental with like abandonment. Like we spoke a lot about like my relationship with my dad.
Mhm.
Um, my mom loved her to death, but even then, I that was that honestly is probably the funniest one. It's not funny. Love my mother to death, but we don't. I think we, especially in the Black community, we have such loyalty to family because
Mhm.
we a lot of times, what through historically, all we had was family and religion,
Yeah.
and that's all we put. Family and God come first. And
Mhm.
so for me, in my life, I made so many decisions for myself because this is my life,
Mhm.
and the people in the generations before me in my family, they didn't comprehend that, and they don't comprehend it. Some still.
Mhm.
I'm in my late 20s. I ain't got no kids.
Mhm.
I don't have a husband. I don't have a puppy. It is me. So why
Mhm.
would I not be selfish about how I do my life? And but I think that we have such a loyalty they can't comprehend. Amber doesn't come home but once a year, if that. I don't want to. And it's really kind of breaking things down. Like I will live my life how I want to the point where now my mom is like, I am so proud of you because I've truly lived my life how I want to. And she kind of sees where she's, whether it be family, society, socially, she's been kind of put in this little box. So she didn't get to live her life like she wanted to, but she sees how I do because especially through therapy, the level of peace that I've accomplished, I found my peace that I've
Yes.
accomplished through therapy and working through my traumas because things that I didn't identify it. Once again, once you call, you can't. I think for me, and I think I can see I really looking now, gone through it many times with you. You can't really start to break anything down until you call a thing a thing. I'd never called it pain, so I never identified it as pain, so I never treated it as pain. It was what happened to me, and that was it. It's just like it's part of my past, and that's it. But it wasn't part of my past because it was still there. I wouldn't have ugly cried like that with snot everywhere if it wasn't still there. And I think that's a really pivotal part to working through trauma. And like I said, really committing to finding the pieces to that. And I think that's part of the other question I want to dive into is, does the healing last?
Yeah, Les. I'll do all that work and it's gonna go away. No. Yes, yes. So here's what I will say. Does the healing last? Yes, because once your thinking is changed, it's changed. Can we be re-traumatized in any way? Um, sure, sure. So can other things happen that trigger pain that may make us think, okay, I know I worked through this before, but it's happening again. Maybe it is a me thing, right? Maybe the things that I was thinking about it before are true, but we have to think that first in order for us to be re-traumatized in that. So really, it has a lot to do with our thinking. But generally, from trauma, once people kind of unlock that piece and let it go, it's gone.
Mhm.
It's gone. So yes, the healing does last. I personally do not recall any statistical information where it hasn't lasted. It may be out there, maybe, but I haven't seen it myself.
Yeah. And I will say, like you said, that's a lot of work you go through to just flush it down the toilet. I'd be damned. It's 2 years of work on me, and you want to skedaddle yourself into my life with chaos and negativity? Absolutely not.
Right.
It's you like I really feel like once you really start to even starting to break down trauma, you have to get to the end point. Once you start, you're that's a whole other kind of boundary that starts to develop in your life. It's like, look, I put in too much into this.
True.
Now you, your mama, your daddy, your greasy grandmammy, anybody come and disrupt this. No.
Mhm.
And I will say for me, a lot of people don't understand it, but I'm very, very clear on my boundaries. And when I feel that this is stepped over or disrespected, you will get the fury of hell before I allow you to cross that boundary. It is a very, it's very sacred. My piece is sacred to me.
Yeah.
I put in time, I put in money, and I do not play about my money.
Mhm.
Into myself. And that's it's an investment into yourself if you're able to do that. So like I said, once again, it's therapy is not cheap if you don't have certain insurance settings.
Mhm.
But one thing I did want to touch on are what are some consequences to harboring trauma?
Misery. Misery. So here's the thing: when we are traumatized and our thinking is changed so that we're now seeing things through the lens of our trauma, we're not seeing things as they are. So we're living a completely different reality that only exists within our emotions. And that's miserable because no one else is living with us.
Yes. Yes. The world is going by and you're over here fighting yourself.
Yeah, really, honestly. Or you're angry all the time, or everything's an argument. It actually, I think about Kevin Hart. He did his stand up. I can't remember which one it was, but he was talking to his ex wife. And he said something to her and she responded, "Oh, you got an issue with my stretch marks?" And he was like, "What?" And she just kept going on and on and on. And that comes to mind because that's kind of what it's like when you're living in a traumatized state where you have all this internal emotional issues coming up and you're spewing it out, but no one really knows what you're talking about because they're not living it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fairly miserable. It's kind of hard to relate to people, and you're carrying that heaviness of a lot of unnecessary pain,
Mm-hmm.
which is just not a comfortable place to be. Can it can cause further stress on the body because stress does lead to a lot of illnesses. So you can get physically ill, um, develop depression, you can develop anxiety, and yeah, it's just kind of just not healthy living.
Yeah, I can attest to that. It's very isolating, I think, too, because I know for myself, when I get mean. And I didn't care about making friends or having relationships. I didn't care. I didn't want it.
Mhm.
And it was, to me, it's just protecting myself. It's also just like, I think it's another thing, a reason with me wanting to go to therapy is it's like, no one deserves that for me. They didn't do anything to me, but I keep projecting onto other people. Um, but I think that was also very, very important to me. But I do want to wrap this up with one last question.
Sure.
We did touch on this a few times by saying, for some people, sessions with the licensed therapist might not be affordable. But what are some mechanisms that we can implement to our daily lifestyles as far as self care and just self care in general?
Mhm. So there are tons of books and tools and stuff out there that, and you can just kind of go to the self-help section of Barnes and Nobles. But some basic things that I like to incorporate that helps with self-care: um, rest.
Yes.
Rest does a body good and a mind because we get mentally exhausted as well as physically exhausted. And if we don't have that balance of rest in our life, it's really hard to be okay. A balanced diet, simple stuff. But I did take a training on nutrition and mental health, and they said that in postpartum, for example, sometimes they're just deficient in an actual a vitamin. I don't remember if it was D or B, and they would just give the mother the vitamin, and the postpartum would disappear. No depression.
B12, because I feel like that shot just works magic.
Okay.
'Cause yes, and it's actually I had a coworker. She used to go and get her B12 shot, come back on top of the world.
On top of the world.
Mhm. But no, I think that's why I want to pause it. We might need to make a break this to like multiple parts and have you back soon. This is really great.
Oh,
Uh,
sure.
so thank you so much for being here. If there are any questions from the audience, you guys can ask them now or drop them in the chat. I should have mentioned this earlier. I think also one to think too. I think one thing that's been great for me. I love listening to podcasts, and
Mhm.
there are tons of great self care podcasts. There's Black Girl Therapy or the Black Girls Therapist, or this is one of them. I think I also love that she starts every episode with, "This is not serve as a substitute for a
Mhm.
session with a licensed therapist. You can listen to all you want. I am not your therapist." But is this these are no, I hope you guys get great things from this. But yeah, I think I would say for me, because I think I love listening to how other people talk and their mindsets, and that's just me. So I know podcasts for me help a lot too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are there any questions? If not, we can roll on now. Oh, we got one question from Kendra. So, what are your thoughts on group therapy?
Group therapy is fantastic. I used to run groups for teenagers back in the day. Challenging as a coordinator at times, but really good because I think it's helpful um, to not feel so alone.
Mhm.
So many times when we're telling our story, when we're going through our stuff, we think that we're the only ones that are going through it and no one else understands. But when you have other people in a group setting that are finishing your sentences because they get it, it normalizes it
Mhm.
for us. And it's very empowering. We don't feel so alone. So I think group therapy is good. And also I believe group therapy is less expensive than individual therapy. So, you know, if perhaps insurance doesn't cover for you for individual therapy, there are grief groups, depression groups, anxiety groups that I believe are a little bit more affordable.
Right. And there was one question that just popped into my head. How do you work with a client or patient that is starting to become stagnant with their growth in therapy, especially when it comes to trauma? They may have gotten to a point they're like, nope, I'm done. Or
Mm-hmm.
and it's even coming in for depression or anxiety. This is like this. They may not say they need a break, but they just become seemingly stagnant.
Mm-hmm. Stagnant as far as their progress.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I like to talk about it and find out what's going on. So sometimes it is too much too soon and people just kind of freeze. Subconsciously they freeze. And you know, they're not ready to dive in. So we look at it, talk about what's going on, what they're feeling. Other times people just, you know, that they've come to the end. They're just ready to stop. And that's okay too. But if it is something where they want to continue, but they're not able to on their own, then we just take our time and we just chip away at their pace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions, so I think we are done. Well, thank you so much for being here and participating. And thank you guys so much for viewing. Um, I'm not gonna lie, it's a long weekend. I'll probably have this available on like Tuesday, possibly Wednesday. I'm not gonna lie to myself, but it will be available on the YouTube channel, but also my website and the blog tab. If you guys want to review or just go back and rewatch it or share with your friends or colleagues, it'll be available. Um, if there's nothing else, we can head on out. Thank you guys for being here. Don, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for
The brink
having
of
me.
the
You got it. I'm here.
You guys have a good night and thank you again.
Take care.
Bye, guys.